Hello and welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen, to a Command & Conquer lore video. Today we're going to be talking about Tiberium. It's a resource in the Command & Conquer franchise, and more notably in the Tiberium saga, or the Tiberian saga, and it's really important. So first thing we need to ask is, what is Tiberium? But before I ask that, just so you guys know, there's another person with me. His name is Fairman.
Hey.
And we're going to be talking about Tiberium. So, what is Tiberium, Fairman?
Tiberium is a crystal that has organic and mineral compounds, which spreads to pretty much like a mushroom, at least in its first stage of evolution, until it decides to go for more aggressive ways of spreading itself, or proliferating.
Proliferating. Oh, look at you using big words on me now. Hold on.
I'm using the big word.
Stop that. Okay. So yeah, no, Tiberium is a sort of like a parasitic life form. Now, there's a couple of things about it we need to talk about before we get too much into the evolution of Tiberium and how it changes. Is the first thing is the origin story of the Tiberium. How did Tiberium come to Earth? And Tiberium's origin in the Tiberian storyline dates as far back as to 1995. Now, there is some conflicting sources saying that Tiberium stuff has been referenced, in ancient Egypt, but with this lore, it's kind of messy, because we were going through the manuscripts and the Bibles from their lore Bibles from Westwood Studios to, Victory Games when they were occupied by EA. Occupied. That's terrible. But, occupied by EA, like they're Nazi Germany. Gotcha. But you get some conflicting stuff, and things begin to change. So we're going to go with the base foundation that the canon is in the first Tiberium game. 1995, they discovered Tiberium near the river Tiber in Italy. And so hence the name Tiber. However, it's got some conflicting things about its name. So the GDI gave it the Tiberium name because it was near the Tiber River. And it's like Tiberium, it's like a metal. Fairman, what was the other name?
The other claim comes from Cain himself, who claims he named it after the Roman general Tiberius.
Yep, Tiberius. And so he claims that he named it that way, but most sources in the lore credit the GDI for the name, the Global Defense Initiative, which is a faction in the game. And that's just a little bit of interesting stuff about it. Now, other than that, it's hinted at, and I think we can safely say that its origin is confirmed, but it's not canonized. It's kind of weird. So Tiberium came to Earth, but in some of the lore it says it was there all along. It was, just sort of appeared. It makes more sense that it came as an extraterrestrial sort of seed from the Skrin, which is another faction that plant Tiberium on planets so that they can come back and harvest them once Tiberium has, fully infested the world, turning into basically just a big giant piece of resources. Because, interestingly enough, Tiberium harvests all the nutrients and moisture out of the soil when it grows. It absorbs everything around it and just becomes like what you could say is just condensed resources. And so you can harvest it, refine it, and do stuff to it, and all sorts of cool stuff. Now, in terms of how do you harvest Tiberium? In the game, it's pretty simple, and it's in the lore, it's the same way. They use harvesters. There's these little trucks or tractors, and they see different models and variations throughout the franchise, and they basically go out into the Tiberium field, and they gather up the crystals by, sucking them in, scraping them off the ground, basically. Now, they don't really explain how, the Tiberium doesn't affect the armor on these harvesters at all. I don't think, Fairman, do you?
That wasn't much of a problem for the first version, but second one, it does not get explained. I do think it's probably by keeping it in constant motion.
Maybe.
So it don't have time to fuse.
Because, it fuses to almost anything it comes in contact with. Even the pod form, which you see in Tiberium Dawn, has a tendency to, absorb and grow on everything, and then just sucks all the nutrients out. Sort of like a weed.
Much less aggressive.
It was much less aggressive. It's also a lot slower because it had to grow, and it took a while. However, one important thing to note is that also the plant form also influenced where it spread, how it was spreading. So you'd see it spread based where, plant life was. So you'd see like In more temperate climates, like where there was more plant life, Tiberium could spread faster because there's more life forms to use to spread it. So it could, grow quicker and to cover more ground. It spread two major ways. One way was the blossom trees, which are mutated trees from the Tiberium that, spits out Tiberium, like little crystals, little seeds, and then they grow. The other way is the little veins that run underneath the ground. So when Tiberium grows, the Tiberium pods, they grow out little roots. And these roots, grow back up and make new Tiberium pods. This was a huge problem in the game and in the lore because they couldn't quite get rid of Tiberium. So they harvest all the Tiberium up and then they leave and they come back and be like, what the fuck, there's Tiberium again. Granted, every time they did, the soil began to look more dead, dry, and cracked, which is why in the Command and Conquer games, everything looks kind of like a desert, is because the Tiberium has drained all the nutrients and valuable minerals out of the soil, and so it makes agriculture and life forms like living there almost, impossible, because they can't.
Massive amount of desertification.
Yeah. The damage Tiberium does to the ecosystem is astronomical. It is, while even in the pod form, it's not very aggressive in terms of spreading, it is very dangerous to the ecosystem, its local ecosystem where it impacts, because it immediately takes root and disrupts things. It's toxic and hazardous to be around because it emanates gases, and these gases are lethal, and they can cause mutations. We'll not get too much into that because that's another whole fucking line of stuff in a second here. But another huge factor is moisture, and that has to do with the fact that where moisture is, plants will be. Therefore, Tiberium will be. Weather patterns. Now, this is the first version of Tiberium. This is the more mushroom-like version. Now, there's a couple of Tiberium variations. There's the blossom tree. The blossom tree is what spits out Tiberium crystals and gases into the atmosphere, slowly, killing off anything in that radius. Then there's the Riparius. The Riparius is the Tiberium pods. Those are the little plant-like things you see in the first Tiberium War and in the second Tiberium War. And in the second Tiberium War, which is Tiberian Sun, you'll see these blue crystals form called Vinifera. Vinifera is the newer version of the Tiberium. It's the more, what would you call it, Fairman? Mature version. It's mature. It's more crystal-like. It's less plant-like. It grows slower. In the Vinifera in this form, bear in mind that it's constantly evolving because Tiberium isn't canon that it said it's a life form, but there's theories within the game universe about it being a life form. And the way Tiberium evolves and reacts to GDI's countermeasures to deal with it and contain it sort of proves that it is relatively lifelike in terms of evolutionary wise. What was that, Fairman?
Also, Vinifera is a lot more volatile than the normal Tiberium.
Yes, Vinifera
needs to be said.
Vinifera is explosive and can actually cause catalysts. So, for instance, in the game and in the lore, Vinifera that has an explosion take place near it and the explosion hits the Vinifera, it causes the Vinifera to explode. And if in close proximity to a Vinifera field of condensed Vinifera, it can explode in a chain reaction, which anyone or anything near it's going to be fucking really sad, aka harvesters or whatever's out in the field. You won't see too much. You shouldn't see infantry in the field. Even in the second Tiberium War, they hadn't invented zone troopers, and their suits were able to protect them from the hostile, hazardous environment of the yellow and red zones, but they couldn't quite protect them from actual contact yet, because any infantry that makes contact with Tiberium its radiation and its hazardous gases melts through their fucking armor.
It was always Nord who actually managed to somehow perfect their Tiberian protection system, so they could, even in the first Tiberium Wars, already send some specialized infantry into Tiberium fields without danger.
Yep. Nod is also one of the leading factions in terms of harvesting. They also pioneered Tiberium harvesting, and they were always in the lead in terms of efficiency in harvesting, which is why Nod always had a distinct advantage over the other factions in the game, and economically as well. While they may have been a terrorist organization, they had also perfected Tiberium harvesting, so they were already harvesting it before everyone else and doing it the better way, the more efficient way, which is the way you see now with, the harvesters scraping up Tiberium. It's pretty simple, but the method was pretty easy. Basically, they go scrape the crystals off the pods and then leave. The pods regrow the crystals, they come back and scrape them again.
I do tend to say, although, that Nod kinda got pushed from that throne when the screen arrived.
When the screen arrived, yes, they didn't really have that. And by the third Tiberium War, it didn't matter, because, hell, even by the second Tiberium War, the world had already changed from, like, you know, what you'd expect you'd see outside. Yeah, but there's Tiberium, but it's affecting stuff, but it's not really causing any environmental damage. Bearing in mind, as the second Tiberium War happened in 2034, you know, over the couple decades, so much Tiberium was being pumped into the atmosphere, and this was a myriad of factors. Tiberium spreading into the ocean is my theory as to why it's the biggest, because when Tiberium spreads into the ocean, it creates algae-like substance on the surface. Now, the ocean at this point is dead. There's no life forms in it. I'm pretty fucking sure, Fairman. I don't know. But
no carbon-based life forms.
No carbon-based life. Yeah, there's probably some horrendous Tiberium entities in the ocean, but there's no carbon-based life in the second Tiberium War in the ocean, is what I'd wager. Now, in Tiberian Sun, you see algae on the top of the water surface. I'm fairly certain that means there's Tiberium underneath there. Because algae's kind of already dead, because it's a carbon-based life. That's the Tiberium strands coming from the seabed.
These are Tiberium algae that pretty much work like lily pads from ground, on the ground.
Yep, where the underwater crystals are underground, and they rise up to the surface through these little tendrils that reach up to the surface. So if you were underwater, I imagine if you could look at it, you would see these little tiny tendrils reaching up from the dark depths, you know, creepy, yeah, kind of eerie. And you'd see a bright glow from, you know, the sea floor, because Tiberium glows. And then you'd see like a mat on the surface of the water covering the top. And that's the algae. Also, that produces gases. The Tiberium gases, which are very, very deadly. Exposure to the gases can cause some things. Mild exposure, if you just, you know, get some mild exposure, you have a tendency to either A, get some minor mutations. If you get a little bit more exposure, you're going to start seeing things like, what's the one horrendous process that happens to you, Fairman? Do you remember?
Viscerization.
Viscerization? I don't know. They call them viceroids. But basically, rips you out internally.
Yes. Mutated blobs of flesh that was without control. Short-term exposure to high concentrations of Tiberium, and you just literally turn. It's a process that can take place over seconds.
Yeah, it happens pretty quickly. You see this in the first Tiberium War, occasionally, not really. It's referenced in cutscenes. And you see it in Renerade, which takes place in the first Tiberium War as well, with actual viceroids, you know, little gelatinous blobs crawling on the ground. But you see it in Tiberian Sun, where instead of infantry combusting into flames, because infantry in the first Tiberium War didn't have protective suits yet. They were wearing, you know, their basic, you know, battlefield uniform with, you know, body armor, and they would just catch on fire from the sheer heat of being near the Tiberium. The second Tiberium War...
Or mutate.
They'd mutate in the lore. They never mutated in the game, though. In the second Tiberium, because they had protective suits, it sort of slow cooks them, and so they mutate from within, and then they rip out, you know, internally, which is kind of unfortunate for the occupants of the suit, but it is what it is. Now, one quick thing on the Tiberium variations is post 2034. Tiberium will mutate into where you'll see the blossom trees and the Riparius. It'll go extinct. The life form Tiberium will go extinct. And you'll just see the Vinifera as the primary mainstay, forming giant Tiberium glaciers, which are just these massive sheets of Tiberium that begin to cover these things. That pumps up a lot of fucking gases, by the way, and makes any areas which would be later deemed red zones uninhabitable by human life, because you can't live there. The only thing I think that can actually enter a red zone is a guy in a zone trooper uniform or a suit, which is huge fucking, you know, hazardous material suit for going into red zones and dangerous zones where the Tiberium is too hazardous to deal with.
These things are basically full body armor, because conditions in a red zone are...
They're pretty bad. They have iron storms, don't they, in the red zones?
Iron storms, Tiberium, basically whirlwinds that fling around shards with very high temperature speeds, toxic air, huge chasms, and the ground itself tends to be rather unstable due to Tiberium hollowing out ground and moving.
Yep. It reaches down and it actually affects the tectonic plates. Hills will collapse and rip. Once, like under a hill, there'd be Tiberium. Tiberium is growing underground, during the later stages of its infection. Even in the early stages, any sort of caverns underground or underground caverns, you'll see Tiberium nests grow. These things will grow and basically hollow out the ground and weaken the entire, structure of the underground network underneath the earth. And basically what you'll get is these massive tear opens, where these massive sheets of Tiberium that are running underneath, underneath the earth, or underneath, the tectonic plates that are just fucking ripping apart, the tectonic plates. And they begin to affect things, catastrophically. Now, there's really no way to deal with Tiberium on the surface level, on the tectonic plate level, because it's too deep to reach, and they can't quite drill at it to get at it. But the GDI will use a couple of methods to deal with it, and one of the early methods was building of walls, to contain Tiberium, because Tiberium, the Riparius form, the pod version, couldn't quite grow very easily over concrete walls and things like that. So concrete actually slowed it down quite a bit. As Tiberium would eventually continue to evolve, that measure wouldn't work as well. The next big countermeasure to dealing with the Tiberium infection was using the sonic technology invented in the Second Tiberium War, which was able to disrupt the crystals on sort of a molecular level to sort of break them apart and, basically kill them. It worked, it was pretty effective, but again, Tiberium was already spreading because it had evolved too much. Because as the Tiberium infestation continued, the rate at which Tiberium would spread would increase. And eventually, the, Vesperus? I always fucking forget its name all the time. The second... the Vinifera. The Vinifera form would actually evolve to be faster. So after the Second Tiberium War, Vinifera became the mainstay Tiberium because all the other Tiberium died off, but it began to evolve faster as GDI started countermeasuring it and trying to do reclamation efforts to reclaim land. So you see Tiberium begin to spread faster and in new different ways, and it's kind of, it might have something to do with Nod helping to spread it, and it might also have to do with, maybe Tiberium is evolving, because it's, again, not confirmed that it is a life form, but it has a lifelike quality to it in terms of how it is attempting to survive and consume and adapt. At least I think so. Tiberium is very also dangerous. It's obviously toxic to carbon-based life forms. It's capable, of mutating things on contact. If mutations are left untreated, and there are ways to use sonic treatment to sort of remove the crystals that are growing inside of a person, they will...
Yeah, but these are very painful, and well, it is a chance, it is a rather slim one.
Yeah, no, sonic treatment might not actually cure you of it. They've attempted to cure, most people in the red zones when the GDI were pulling out, because they lost the red zones to Tiberium infestation, and GDI, coupled with the fact that they're also fighting the terrorist organization known as Nod, who is at the same time spreading Tiberium, makes it hard for the Global Defense Initiative to maintain order. So they've begun abandoning certain areas, which would be formed as red zones, as lost areas of the Earth, basically. Yellow zones have a low GDI presence, little to none almost, and Nod runs rampant through there normally. And you see a lot of Tiberium beginning to spread. These red zones are growing always into the yellow zones, and the yellow zones are expanding towards the blue. Blue is the last bastions, where it's very Earth-like still.
Pretty much no Tiberium infestation at all.
Yes. Now, there's one other thing we need to mention, though. With the dying off of the blossom trees and the way it was spitting out Tiberium crystals into the atmosphere, causing ion storms on a global thing, there was a thing called the Firestorm Crisis, where, it got so bad that, the firestorms were just beginning to tear apart everything, which are these massive storms of this horrifying lightning striking the ground, basically, just doing tremendous damage between the crystals and the earth to any structure.
Also stopping any and all air traffic.
Yep.
Completely impossible.
Makes air traffic impossible as well. Communications go down, everything goes down, power goes out, sucks out the power. Power needs to be turned off too. They're pretty bad. You had this thing that happened. Now, I'm not going to reference Cabal too much because he's not really relevant here, and nor is the Tacitus too much. But basically, they dying off of the blossom trees caused the Firestorm Crisis to end. So the Firestorm Crisis was lifted up, and they didn't really have to deal with it anymore. Once they had, that sort of helped restore air travel. The GDI would also, sort of clean up the seas with their sonic tech a little bit to sort of restore sea travel, because sea lanes can't quite travel through the, the dangers of the plant life and stuff, because it's Tiberium. It'll latch onto the ship and start doing damage and eating it.
I do think it is worth noticing that being able to at least decipher parts of the Tacitus played a huge role in enabling GDI actually do decontamination efforts.
Yes, that's true. It helped. I think that helped with the sonic technology as well, because we were also able to perfect it a little bit in order to, begin to disrupt the crystals more. Now, there's an important thing. You'll see the Tiberium creatures sort of die off once the bipods. I'm sorry. The Tiberium pods and the blossom trees go extinct. The life forms will have begun to either crystallize fully, where the Vinifera actually crystallizes the whole body. The Riparius, which is the original Tiberium variant, didn't crystallize fully. It had a chance to mutate, increase your longevity, your lifespan, and improve some qualities of you, mutating you. But it also had horrible side effects of tumors, cancers, and other terrible fucking things that would kill you slowly. It was still killing you, bear that in mind, because it's still eating you from the inside. But
the second one was just content with just outright brute force converting you.
Yeah, brute force conversion, which just crystallized you fully, and that one was pretty fatal. It normally for victims you'd see loss of limbs, loss of huge chunks of their body, but they had to basically break off that chunk and then use the sonic treatment to try to break apart the crystals that were spreading. And bear in mind that it gets in your bloodstream, and you got to use the sonic treatment to get out of your bloodstream as well, because you got little crystals traveling around in there. It is bad.
Basically, amputation is probably your best chance of survival at this point.
Amputation at this point is going to be the best form of treatment. And again, if it gets past your limb and into your internals, you're shot. You just basically slow die.
Organ failure is the most common death form Tiberian infection.
Yep, organ failure, and then once you're dead, your body stops moving, and so the crystallization process actually speeds up. Because movement and friction actually keeps down crystallization. Based on what we've seen. Now, that's not a canon source thing. I'm just going by the fact that harvesters moving through Tiberium do not receive Tiberium growth. They're also built and improved to resist Tiberium as well. And that also goes for armored vehicles. Armored vehicles can traverse through crystals, and there's little to no effect. We're going out the process of assuming again, that movement, friction, prevents it from allowing it to fuse. So as long as you're moving, you're okay. Supposedly. Again, if it gets in your lungs, it sticks. That's bad.
Also, it is usually easier to stick to organic matter than to, mineral matter.
Yes. So you can drive tanks, you can walk mechs through them, and it should be fine. If they stand still, then you're gonna have a problem.
Massive decontamination is required afterwards anyway.
Yep, all vehicles entering a Tiberium field must be decontaminized, otherwise it'll spread Tiberium. There's another thing, another Tiberium life form. They're vein holes. They look like little anuses. I love it. God damn it.
Well, they do, and they even fart.
Yes, they're basically some sort of life form that took shape. Okay, so there's underground networks, right? These tubes forming where Tiberium's growing around, right? So underneath these vein holes, there's a huge chasm of Tiberium. But there's a little mouth, and it's like a life form almost. Or it is a life form, which only helps to prove that Tiberium is a life form, even though it doesn't confirm it. But even though it's not, the crystal itself isn't making the life things, it's everything around it forms into it. It basically closes and opens like an anus. I hate to say it, but it'll spit out gases if if agitated.
The little veins around it are described to tearing apart prey and then just delivering it to the mouth for it to digest. Smaller prey is actually able to avoid this by not being heavy enough to trigger this, but these things even go after vehicles.
Yes, those Tiberium veins, they're called like vein fields. They're basically like little. They look like they're described to look like little. What would it be? Little prickly things sticking out of the ground. They latch onto you or latch onto things, and they tear it apart out in the field. They start ripping away at it, and then it drags the materials back into the mouth, which basically drops it into the chasm of Tiberium below. It's pretty bad. You can destroy a vein hole in the games, but I don't know how that makes sense, because the chasm of Tiberium is still underneath that vein hole. Even if you basically, okay, you kill the organism. You can kill the organism with the little tendrils by shooting the opening, because apparently it's got enough internal organs there, or bits. They don't really go into detail. It
probably collapses the hole, and then it just regrows after that time.
Yeah, it'll probably grow. That makes more sense. Because the chasm is still down there. The Tiberium is still down there. You just temporarily disable it. The next thing is Tiberian Fiends. Now, bear in mind, a lot of these creatures and monsters, they don't even know what they are. They have some speculation. Like the Tiberian Fiends look kind of like horses, but they're also kind of like dogs. So it mixed, could be both, could be either. Tiberium has a tendency to change creatures into certain life forms repeatedly, as if they're sort of creating a new environment, if that makes sense, a new ecosystem of their own. And this is in the Tiberian Sun era, back when it's a life form. So you do begin to see this new alien, otherworldly ecosystem form, and you see that in the game, where these trees are like weird looking, and everything's like weird looking. There's animals, but they're not what you and I would expect. They're very different.
It made it kind of hard to believe you were still on Earth at some places back then. Yeah,
it felt very alien, and that combined with Frank Capacchi's, tracking that, how alien it sounded, it made it feel alien, like the Earth was changing, which that was cool, in a very creepy kind of way. The next one are Tiberian Floaters. These ones nobody really knows anything about. Fairman and I think they're jellyfish, and they just sort of float on the ground. They're amphibious. They can go over water. They can go over land. They have tendrils that come out of them, and these tendrils, kind of like the vein hole monster, grab you, tear you apart, and eat you.
Also, they like to electrocute someone because they
shock.
To be able to bring up forth pretty heavy electric currents.
Yes.
Able to even fry tanks.
And fry through armor. Melt through armor. Yeah, they're pretty horrifying. Then there's human mutants. These are mutants that are not the humans that didn't turn into viceroys, but have crystals, growing on them. They can vary from aggressive to civil. It really just depends. They're basically sick people, and again, they just need treatment.
It really more depends on the person than on the mutation strain.
Yes. These the Tiberium crystals can also extend life, but they'll also kill you.
Probably will kill you.
They will eventually. They're eating you.
The life extension is only theoretical.
It's theoretical, but then again, they've cured it, so nobody actually lived that long to find out. But then again, there's mutants in the third Tiberium War, and those mutants are heavily changed. They look like they have very crustaceous bodies. Like it's very thick-skinned, or they look different. in a way that is almost inhuman, actually. You can recruit them as mercenaries in the game, so they're sentient, they're capable of commerce and trade and warfare, but they are pretty low level on there, if that makes sense. And you do see the Forgotten appear again. What's that?
Also, I think a lot of them did lost quite a bit of brain functions.
You know, the brain begins to deteriorate as well. Then there's Tiberian plant life, and these can vary from the weird, bizarre things you see in Tiberian Sun. And again, Tiberian Sun is where all this Tiberium life forms are at, and then Tiberium Wars, they all died off. And we don't really know much other than the algae and some of the trees, the blossom trees. We don't know much about the other weird things, like the blue, weird plant-looking thing. And
suggested that they basically work like normal trees, but instead of putting out oxygen, they put out Tiberium-based gases.
Yes, and that the Tiberium-based life forms live around. Hence why you only find them near the ecosystem.
One of the reasons why the atmosphere decontaminated a bit after the change of Tiberium.
And that's why the life forms also disappeared as well. That's also why you see infantry, both GDI and Nod, wearing suits all the time, because they can't breathe.
I think that, yeah, so in the third Tiberium Wars they actually did gone back a bit on that.
Yep, because they could breathe again.
Unless they were in a freaking red zone or yellow zone.
Yeah, yellow zones and red zones. Yellow zones can vary, red zones are definitely no-goes. Yep. Let's see. So, yeah, the evolution of Tiberium in 1995 to about, what, 2034?
2034.
Because that's when the second Tiberium War is. So, 1995 to 2034, you have the pod-like Tiberiums, the tree ones, and the life forms. Then 2034 to 2060-something, because it's CNC4, but who cares about that too much? Basically, through 2047, which is the third Tiberium War, you see the crystal-like formation. The as they call it, the self-replicating proton lattice, which is, it basically completely assimilates everything it touches. Yeah. So that's why the wall countermeasures failed too.
It turned from an organic mineral-based compound to a pretty much only mineral compound. Not even compound anymore.
Yep, just a crystalline sort of thing. The evolution caused the firestorm to actually stop. The big firestorms.
Yep.
But the red zone still suffer from firestorms. What's that?
They started to become more of a localized element again.
Yep, so the firestorms weren't a big deal. Air travel was allowed again, and the algae that you'd see actually disappeared. Because you do not see it in the Tiberium Wars game, because the plant life, the Tiberium life form changed. Which, to be honest, like, it's cool to see Tiberium go through an evolution, but if I'm to be a little bit subjective here, I preferred the life form Tiberium variant because it was much cooler. But then again, they were getting a little bit too apocalyptic there with Tiberian Sun.
Yep.
Because it was reaching, pretty bad times indeed.
So the change of Tiberium kind of gave humanity a break.
Yes, but the way it spread actually increased slightly.
Yes. It basically decided, that's my theory, the first one was basically like an infant state, and then it matured and turned into the much more aggressive, completely crystal-based version.
Yep. And there's now another important thing to mention, Tiberium Weapons. Now, Tiberium is a huge part of the lore, but it's also a weapon, and you'll see it used. Mostly by the Brotherhood of Nod. There are some instances in Renegade, but we're not going to really count them too much, because it's more multiplayer PvP.
Picking up a weapon and using it, so...
Yeah, it's not really story-based, even. Like, even the story, the GDI don't use them in Renegade. So, a couple units to mention. Chemical Warrior in the first Command & Conquer shoots concentrated Tiberium gas at enemies. Bearing in mind, they haven't quite invented liquid Tiberium at this point yet. So it was just the gases, the hazardous gases. It would shoot it out in sort of like a chemical air and just suffocate and melt a person. Or turn them into a viceroy.
Yeah, mutating them, and highly and fast oxidizing / corroding vehicles.
Yes, which just melts them away.
These guys were not fun to be around, whether you were not or JDI.
Yeah, no, not at all. If you shoot their packs, they'd explode. I remember that. What was it Tiberium Troopers? Now, Tiberium Troopers, you'll see those in the Tiberium Wars. That's the third one. They use liquid Tiberium. It's sort of like, almost like a flamethrower-like substance, but it's like running liquid, and it just fucking sticks to everything and it spreads Tiberium. It's pretty nasty.
They were also not a mainstay of the Nord Army, but only for the Mark of Cain, a very, very loyal subfaction towards Cain.
Yep, the more religious sect.
No, they mainly were cyborgs, so they I think being illoyal was not part of their program at this point.
That's true. And that's also the thing. A lot of the cyborgs are actually powered by Tiberium technology, or influenced by Tiberium technology, because most of it's the Brotherhood of Nod tech. And so cyborgs actually heal in Tiberium.
Was a catalyst to allow the fusion between flesh and machine, because, well, again, compound.
Yep. Now, another weapon is the Catalyst Missile. This is more of a story-based thing, and it was in the game as well, in Tiberium Wars. It causes a chain reaction in Tiberium. It was also used to disrupt the scrin, because, the scrin rely on Tiberium, and the missile causes a catalyst within Tiberium. Thus, fucking up all their shit when they, explode. Then there's the World-Altering Missile. This is the Tiberian Sun weapon that Nod was building. The World-Altering Missile basically detonates in the atmosphere, and it basically just, it finalizes, the death throes of the way our world works. Thus,
changes humanity and every life form on the planet from carbon-based to being Tiberium-based.
Yep, it's an instant conversion missile. Nobody knows what happens other than the fact in the cutscene that the planet just glue green. It's not the canon ending, because obviously Tiberium Wars couldn't exist the way it does now. And that's kind of what the World-Altering Missile does, the WAM. Then there's the Liquid Tiberium Bomb. That's in the third Tiberium Wars. That one explodes, and it basically alerts the scrin. Liquid Tiberium it's not like the World-Altering Missile, because the World-Altering Missile was condensed Tiberium crystals. That's what that was.
With the Tacitus as catalyst.
With the Tacitus as catalyst, yep. The Liquid Tiberium Bomb was basically just liquid, which is what, like 10 megaton nuke bomb or something? Like
it's basically the nuke equivalent to a normal Tiberium weapon.
It's like 10 times. It's like 10 times the most powerful nuclear weapon. It's pretty terrifying, because if you remember the cinematic, it blows up like half the world.
Yeah. I think it's basically devastated pretty much all of Eastern Europe and parts of Upper Africa.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Yeah, and that's kind of it for the Tiberium weapons. Now, let's talk real quick about Tiberium and how it plays in the games. Because now we talked quite a bit about the lore, but how does Tiberium play in the games? Now, we'll go through each game that has Tiberium in it. So we're going to start first with Tiberian Dawn, which is the first Command & Conquer. And it's pretty simple how it plays. It's just a gatherable resource. It's hazardous to infantry. It causes them to catch on fire. There is the Blossom Tree, sees a debut, and I think they show a Viceroy at some point.
Yes, there is actually in one of the expansions is an in-game model for the Viceroy, and I do think it actually did something, but that's so quite a long time I played these games, so I cannot completely remember.
They're really old. That's true.
But they and the Vinehole monster were directly mentioned in the original Command Conquer. So they are the definite, confirmed oldest mutant species that exists without retconning anything.
Yep, so they do exist in Tiberium Dawn. Now, Tiberium Sun, Tiberium sees a lot more gameplay ramifications. Oh, so one thing to mention on Tiberium Dawn, technically the Chemical Trooper is a Tiberium-based unit. However, it acts kind of like a flamethrower guy.
Yeah, it's pretty much the flamethrower on Tiberium-based steroids.
Pretty much. In Tiberium Sun, Tiberium works in the same vein as it sort of does before, except with one exception. It will grow to cover the map. Very, very slowly. Play on speed 6. I swear to God, it continues to spread if you don't harvest it. Very slowly. Even on speed 6, it took like a good couple hours, and I came back and I was like, wow, there's Tiberium literally everywhere. It was kind of cool, actually.
Yep.
And then that's where you see the Vinifera. introduced there. You do see a lot of mutants introduced here. Actually, all the mutant cast, pretty much, except for the minigun mutants. Were introduced here. You see the vein hole and the way the veins work. As a gatherable resource, by the way, you can actually gather the veins for the for Nod, which helps them make like a little fucking new missile thing. What do you call it? Chem missile? I don't remember the name of it. Which explodes in the air and then causes a bunch of little explosions above it.
It uses the tendrils from the before mentioned vine hole monster because these have a very high concentration of Tiberium gas, which is one of the most aggressive version of Tiberium concentration back then.
Yep, during the second Tiberium War. Then, in Renegade, Tiberium also works a little bit differently here too. It doesn't spread, it just sort of stays on the map. In multiplayer, it's a gatherable resource that your harvester will collect, and it just returns it to your base. It doesn't really do too much other than that. It's hazardous to infantry, and in some instances you'll deal with Viceroids and Super Warrior mutants.
These
soldiers.
mutants were, although the predecessors to the not cyborgs, and the Viceroids also. Mentionable about Renegade is though that probably a lot of the not being able to harvest Tiberium was more of a gameplay choice than a lore choice.
It would be kind of annoying if Tiberium spread over the map as you were just playing a shooter and you just got covered in Tiberium.
An interesting thing because it would change the way infantry could take the longer a match takes, but
well, basically every match, everything would eventually be covered in Tiberium.
If you destroy too much harvesters, that is.
Mm-hmm. Or if it gets to a place a harvester can't reach it. And remember, it's growing underground veins, too. So it's going to spread underneath of things eventually, too. Tiberium Wars. Tiberium and Tiberium Wars would actually be kind of rather not that interesting in how it works. So it works much like it does in Tiberian Dawn again. It only grows in a radius this time, and it doesn't grow past this radius, ever. You can't spread it, other than the fact that the Nod can call down a bomb of liquid Tiberium, which creates like little Tiberium crystals growing out of the ground.
I think that was the Tiberium seed drop. That was just literally throwing Tiberium crystals that just rapidly grow.
Yep, and that's basically it. There's no mutations, infantry die, there are mutants that you can recruit. They basically have like little miniguns.
Infantry could still mutate into the more modern, more stable version of the Viceroid, which is at this point basically a tripod. No longer a amorphous blob.
Or do they do? It's hard to mutate your infantry in this one.
Could mutate, but it was very rare. I know there were Viceroids in that game.
Oh yeah, okay. Yep, it was the tripod Viceroid, which you'd see again in 4. Oof, cancer. But
suicide bombers in 4.
Suicide bombers. Technically, they use liquid Tiberium little bombs tied to them. They go boom. There's liquid Tiberium infantry. There's not a whole lot of Tiberium mechanics. Tiberian somehow they had the most Tiberium mechanics in it.
Yeah, and it mostly got used not for upgrading their buildings, like their power.
Yep, as well as buffing their infantry.
They did, however, manage to make the Tiberium called infusion, which increased the power of their infantry. The long-term effects of this were not known, but they could possibly not be healthy in the long term.
Yeah. Another thing, CNC4. Tiberium works very differently in this. I know, Fairman, calm down.
There is almost no Tiberium in that.
There is almost none.
Which should tell you a lot about this game.
It's a collectible. I remember because all these things I'm going by memory. Because it's like, yeah, I remember how these games work. Even I remember this cancer staying enough. You collect Tiberium, it drops on the map out of Tiberium Control Network nodes, which are basically these things that allow the GDI Nod to collect Tiberium, which has reversed the spread of Tiberium almost into a state of, actually it's almost gone off the world, and when CNC4 takes place. So Tiberium is not a problem anymore, and it's not really an element, but it is a capturable resource, because TCN network nodes will spit one out, and then you basically take it to your base, and it gets you money. There's one other Tiberium... Oh, well, go ahead.
also just because the Tiberium is out of the picture mostly does not mean humanity is out of the fray, because remember the effects of Tiberium on the environment. World is mainly, even if it's not super toxic anymore, but I say at this point it's probably 80 to 90% desert.
Yeah, no, the world is desolate desert. It's barren because all the they may be sucking up all the Tiberium and they got all the resources and nutrients, but now they got to redisperse it on the planet again, which is going to take probably quite a long time, considering how many people have also died in the 3 Tiberium
And how
Wars.
many species potentially gone extinct?
Oh yeah, no, I'm assuming there's a fair few. They don't ever go into details, but they do list casualty statistics here and there of percentages of people lost, about how, oh god, 6 million people have died from respiratory failure due to Tiberium, fucking 11 million from fucking for animals and livestock. It's like, okay, there's definitely an impact on food, economics, societal. In Tiberian Sun is basically an apocalypse game. Tiberium Wars is a lot more controlled. It feels like those blue zones are safe zones, and then there's really shitty zones. Tiberian Sun was the one where everything was hitting the fan, like everything was going to shit. That's also why I like Tiberian Sun the most.
Very bleak outlook, that game.
Tiberian Sun was the bleakest of all the Command & Conquerors, in my opinion.
But it fit the post-apocalyptic setting in terms of atmosphere perfectly.
Yes, it did. Second Tiberium War, I gotta say, best Tiberium mechanics, best Tiberium stuff in it. If you want to experience a lot of Tiberian-based things, in terms of mechanics and just how it affects the story, the second Tiberium War, aka Tiberian Sun, has the most to offer in terms of mechanics and gameplay, based around Tiberium. Which was cool, because it was interesting to see this resource that the game was based around take such an instrumental role in the game. And in the story. Not to mention the theme and the setting was great too. But that might just be me looking through a rose-tinted glass as well, so bear that in mind. Other than that, though, Tiberium doesn't really play a lot of roles in the other things. There's some canceled projects like Tiberium, the game, which was going to be probably pretty cool, but, it's dead now. Then there's the canceled original third Tiberium War game, which was supposed to be on the General's engine. And then there's the Tiberium Alliances, that shit show. Oof.
Yeah, that one wasn't that supposed to be some kind of mixture of MOBA card game?
It's like a weird browser game thing. I played it just because I wanted to see. And then we do have that upcoming, I'm sorry to say it, CNC Rivals. Tiberium will probably be a mechanic in that. I don't really understand how that has any lore impact.
I think at this point it's already out.
It is out?
Yeah, and Tiberium has not a big impact. What had a big impact on this game is real life money, but let's not start with that.
It's green, but it ain't Tiberium.
Yeah.
Oh, god damn it, that's disgusting. But yeah.
Maybe worth mentioning is a potential chance for a reboot.
Yeah, no, there's going to be a Command & Conquer reboot
bring
for
the series back, or maybe even retcon some of the stuff and says.
I'd like to see them. At the same time, I'd like to see a remaster of the first Tiberian Dawn and Tiberian Sun, along with the first Red Alert and second Red Alert. I'd also like to see, very much so, I don't know. I felt like Tiberian Sun got shafted in design, in terms of being cut, because it did get shoved out the door, because the third faction was never finished. The missions were supposed to have, variations of paths to play. Like each, those little bonus missions you could pick in the game still? They were supposed to affect the next mission. By you doing these little secondary missions, these stealth missions, actually, see, I may hate stealth missions. I bitch about them all the time. But they'd change how the main battle to take that area of the map would go. And that was really cool. It's like branching paths in an RTS game.
There were some parts of it left when you, let's say, make that additional mission. You save the part in the next main mission where you have to disable a power plant, or the enemy starts a bit weakened. That was still in game, but
they nerfed what they were saying they were gonna do, though. Also, that one was interesting because they also had sheets of ice mechanic, remember? Heavy units walking over ice.
Or just shooting with heavy weaponry on a unit so it drowns.
Yes. It had so many cool mechanics. Introduced bridge destruction. Tiberian Sun was the most revolutionary, but it was also at the same time the one that got shafted the hardest. Because we didn't get the third faction, and even they had to cut units, re-release them in the Firestorm expansion, and we still never got a third faction. And I think the Firestorm expansion, they should have added Cabal. Should have had 4 factions. Criminy.
Yeah, it was. You could feel that the game was missing something.
It was supposed to be the big, Command and Conquer game. It was going to be the biggest. Tiberian Sun was the one that they were. I remember the way that it was going to be the big one. Like Red Alert 1 was good. They used all that money upon this, but then they ran out of money, and they were backed by EA, so they immediately signed a thing which sold them to EA. EA wanted them to work on Red Alert 2, so they took too long with Tiberian Sun, so they canned the progress. They were like, no, you need to get that out. And so they shoved Tiberian Sun out the door, and it wasn't ready. And it was like, oh, Tiberian Sun should be this game we look back and go like, yeah, it's just fun. It should have been that game we looked back. And again, shoulda, coulda, woulda. But it should have been the game we looked back and went like, yeah, that was the moment in the Command & Conquer franchise. Like Rome Total War was to the Total War franchise.
It was supposed to be the masterpiece.
It was supposed to be the masterpiece. And it's painful. If they remaster it and they just remaster it in the state it's in right now, it would be so much better if they just did Tiberian Sun, but finished it. You know what I mean? Finish it. Like I want that one remastered, but I do not want them to touch it. If they're just gonna improve it a little bit, like the visuals and stuff. Like if you're going to remaster a Command & Conquer and you're going to make it like sing, and finish the mechanics that were never finished. That one is the one that deserves it, in my opinion.
After all, bring us back Tiberium. We need the green crystal.
You do. What was that cancerous thing I saw the other day when we were looking up lore for Tiberium? Just got Tiberium ? Like, oh, cancer. It's like got milk. And they were selling those shirts. Oh God, why?
Little anime girls being happy about Tiberium.
I don't think they would be. They wouldn't be little anime girls. They'd be little viceroids. Disgusting. Get it away from me. Oh, terrible. Either or. I think that concludes... Oh, what?
Let's end here.
Yeah, we'll end it here. Anyways, that's it for the Tiberium lore. Thanks for tuning in. Now, until next time, you guys have a good one.